fortunate to have Lieutenant Governor Molly Gray with us today. And I think this is, the first time you and I have spoken in your capacity as Lieutenant Governor. So it's an honor. Molly has quite a adventurous, I guess I'll say, background, or so it reads to me anyway. Starting on as growing up on a vegetable farm in Newberry. And I found out that, and I didn't know this, that your father was an Olympic athlete.
Oh, wow. We're going into the archives. Okay. Yes,
Okay.
it's true. Yep.
So cross country skiing, right? In 68 and 72, I think it was. And you have an uncle that was a U.S. attorney. You went to UVM, worked for Congressman Welch, both in his D.C. office, and that's the capacity I remember you in,
Yep.
and for his campaign. Traveled some to corners of the world for dealing with humanitarian groups in other parts of the world. Came back to Vermont, went to Vermont Law School, went to work as a law clerk for Judge Peter Hall, and then most recently, before current position, was an assistant attorney general under T.J. Donovan. And last fall, the latest thing to add to your biography is if I'm not mistaken, your first run for elective office, and winning not only the primary but the general election. So congratulations on all of those things. That's quite a very exciting background that you've got with all those pieces strung together leading up to where you are today. So thanks for joining us today. We
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And my understanding is we have about a half an hour. I would love to just talk a little bit about the first 60 days, the first 100 days of serving as Lieutenant Governor. Um, Share anything that I can about the American Rescue Plan, what we're doing, what's happening in Montpelier right now, kind of my vision for sort of why I ran for office and then what I hope we can achieve. But more than anything, if it's okay, to hear from you. What are your
Of
concerns?
course.
What are you hearing? What can I do to be helpful if that works? Does that work?
I think that would work for all of us here. So please just run with it.
Great. Yeah. So a little bit about me. As Joe said, I grew up in Orange County in Newberry, the town that time forgot, a lot of people will say, on a vegetable and dairy farm, still run by my folks and my brothers today. I'd say from a very young age, we wouldn't have a farm. We wouldn't have been able to survive as a business without a lot of support from credit unions and banks. Um, Growing up in Vermont, I went to the University of Vermont and Vermont Law School. I've worked and lived across our state and decided to run for office a little over a year ago because of Vermont's demographic crisis, a crisis that I'm sure you all know very well. We have a shrinking workforce, a shrinking tax base, a lot of young people. And I say young people, I'm talking about 20 somethings to 50 somethings, 60 somethings. We can take it as far and as wide as you'd like to go, who are struggling to make it work in the state. We really, really struggle to recruit and retain employees. As a 30 something, having student loan debt, trying to buy a home, trying to start a family, I think the challenges are pretty significant. And then obviously over the last year, we've experienced this pandemic, which has really laid everything bare, right? From our needs surrounding childcare and paid family and medical leave, to broadband and equity and access, to housing. So I see this as a pretty critical moment for Vermont. And we have one of the most interesting and exciting opportunities, I think, ever in our history with I guess the $1.9 trillion national package, but an estimated 2.7 billion coming to the state for relief, infrastructure investments, and then also one-time strategic investments. I've been working really closely with the legislature. I also, obviously serve as the president of the Senate, so spend a lot of time presiding right now over a virtual Senate. I'm in the State House every day, except for today. Working closely with the governor, meeting regularly, largely around COVID response, but also around some of our shared priorities, workforce development being one of them. and using my platform as much as I can to draw attention to those critical issues facing our state in recovery. I host a regular bi-weekly seat at the table where I try to bring the voices of Vermont communities, be it business leaders, nonprofit leaders, community leaders, into the State House to discuss particular issues, or where I can, working with the President Pro Tem and the Speaker to make sure that there's a sufficient support for our legislative efforts. But day in and day out, my two priorities: one, COVID relief, COVID relief, COVID relief, and two, working on some of the priorities that I ran on as Lieutenant Governor, really trying to figure out how we can partner with businesses, credit unions, and other groups around the state to make Vermont a place where young families can afford a home, can make investments, can have children, can really thrive in the state in the way that I felt my folks thrived growing up, but I'd like my children to thrive and be able to thrive moving forward. So I think I'll leave it there, and I'm really happy to get into any policy areas that are of interest to you, but more than anything, would love to know more about your challenges, what you see on the horizon, how I can be helpful, anything you'd like to share. And I sincerely mean it when I say that I hope this is the first conversation of many to come. And my virtual door for now is open, but my actual door will always be open once COVID lifts.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Molly. And so let's get right to it, and let's open it up for comments, questions, whatever people's thoughts are. I know from the people that are on the line, we've got at least a handful of people that aren't bashful about asking questions
Good.
or saying what they're doing. So that's good. So just jump right in.
So which one of us is going to go first?
You look like you are since you spoke.
I tend to do this, but hi, Lieutenant Governor. My name is John Dwyer. I'm with New England Federal Credit Union. I was actually in the audience this morning when you spoke to the chamber. Our CFO, Sue Leonard, introduced you. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So I spend a fair amount of time with Sue now, like all of us on video. But my specific topic, and want to get into kind of framing for the kind of the industry over the last year. But when you think about affordable housing and you think about housing, one of the opportunities I believe that the credit unions in the state provide for people here in the state is really an ability to do probably much more than people think of us around housing. I think many people probably don't know that we're the largest mortgage lenders. If you look at our industry, credit unions, we're the largest mortgage lenders in the state. We provide a significant share, in fact, the majority of mortgages, more than the banks, more than the out-of-state originators. And over the last year, that's meant literally thousands of new loans, refinance loans. So I think a positive story for your, kind of keep in your pocket as an opportunity is that when you are addressing housing issues and housing opportunities, there's a lot of wherewithal within the credit union industry. Banks as well. There's certainly a lot of banks that do a good job of, and some local banks that do a really good job of mortgages. But that's an area we can engage in. So can you speak a little bit, you spoke about this morning, but some of your efforts around affordable housing, some of your perspective on what the Fed money, the federal, the money that's coming from the feds might help us with in those areas, or that area?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to, I guess, applaud you and recognize that I understand the amount of, the number of mortgages, what makes, I think, credit unions so special and important in my book, and this is what I know you live and breathe every day, is that you have a community pulse. I mean, you understand what's happening in communities across Vermont. And I think when we talk about housing in particular, the housing needs of Burlington and the market of Burlington is different than the housing market and needs of Newbury, where I grew up. And understanding those challenges, understanding how to partner in some cases with the state to be able to meet those needs is really critical. I also know there's been a ton of work through the zero interest financing on weatherization programs, and just a lot of really good opportunities to make really important investments that help families, help our economy. So to your question specifically, in the package that Vermont will receive in the 2.7 billion, there's approximately 50 million for homeowner assistance and then 152 million for rental assistance. How that specifically pans out, I'm not entirely clear yet, whether that has to come to the legislature, that comes to the state directly through direct assistance. But I think there's this moment where Vermont could be very, very historically placed to make some investments and to have the credit unions at the table as we're thinking about how can we make sure that young families or new families are able to access housing? How can we continue to make some of these strategic investments in weatherization? I think it's a little too soon to say, but we know from Senator Leahy and Senator Sanders and Congressman Welch that this is a priority. Obviously, the governor has made some pretty strategic investments in housing as well. So, and it's a priority for Becca Balint and Joe Krawinski and myself. Obviously I don't have as much control over what the legislature does. So, I don't want to say specifically what that means, but I think it's an area where we need to continue talking and making sure that you're at the table along with those who are implementing direct access to housing across the state. And again, I think the needs are really different. So being able to understand the needs and then come up with affordable, flexible, needs-specific responses.
Thank you. I do agree that the areas of the state create different challenges, and certainly what from Joe and working with him previously, he has access to all of us, and we cover the whole state. So
yeah.
I think that's part of the strength is that there's certainly a credit union that can meet those needs wherever you are in the state of Vermont. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're ready for question or comment number 2, whoever is the next.
Mr. Dwyer has a question about broadband.
Driver, actually.
Oh, Driver, sorry.
Driver.
No problem. So I've intentionally detoxed from news and politics since November. So you'll excuse me if this comes across as more of like a political question. You started off with why you got involved with politics as the demographics crisis. We've seen the rise in online services, especially over the last year. But as you no doubt know, we have some challenges in a rural state getting broadband to everyone. So the apology comes in that this is probably I don't know if this policy area is within your wheelhouse, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we get the broadband access problem solved. And, as it directly relates to the credit unions, we service a lot of these members out in these communities. And, having that ability to serve them with broadband connections actually means that we can provide them better financial services. So I'd just love to hear any of your thoughts around how we solve this challenge.
As I said this morning, I'm like, how much time do we have? Because there's so much to say. And I always want to be careful because I feel like lieutenant governors and governors for decades have said, like, we're going to get it. We'll do it now. We'll get it done. But again, historically, we're in a pretty exciting moment. 113 million, it will come through the American Rescue Plan for infrastructure, such as broadband. Literally, like there is basically an earmark for broadband related projects. As I said this morning to the chamber, I see our solution as sort of twofold. There's the immediate emergency needs. Every month, for the last year for the 70,000 homes, businesses that haven't had access to broadband. We know that that's meant a lack of access to financial services, a lack of access to remote work, online learning, basic public safety and health information, telehealth, right? The list goes on. We can talk about that for the rest of the day. And so I think our first priority is how do we make sure through a plan around short-term solutions that we meet that need. And then second, the longer-term solution, which I think has to involve our communications union districts, which I know have been partners in many ways, and you've supported their financing. I think there's a lot of truth in fiber to the home being, the most quality and long-term sustainable broadband option for Vermont. But I think we would be remiss if we didn't also take a step back and recognize that technology is evolving, and it's evolving really quickly, and that there are different tools available in some cases that could provide the overlap and patchwork, close the patchwork that we have currently in the state. My biggest plea to the governor, plea to the legislature, and I sent them an open letter last week, is that when we have the conversation about deployment, which we need to start having extremely soon, that we have the Chamber of Commerce at the table. We have the Vermont Medical Society, that we have the credit unions at the table, that we have all of those groups who throughout this pandemic have had to navigate providing services in an inequitable way, not by any fault of your own, to Vermonters. And so that we're deploying access to services and thinking about the needs of Vermonters and putting them at the center of our deployment strategy as we move forward. But the time is now. I think we have to act quickly and just continue to recognize that every day without broadband for segments of our state have been days without access to basic human services in a 21st century economy. So I'll leave it there, but happy to continue the conversation at any point in the future because it's an issue I'm very focused on.
Thanks. As a technologist, that's really great to hear. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just add that here we are meeting on Zoom. The legislature, government, our town meetings are also now moving to a digital world. Like we have a digital democracy in many ways. I'm not saying that that should stay, but we're also seeing a lack of equitable access to civic engagement and participation in conversations around recovery. So it is such an urgent thing that we need to address.
Do you, just quick sidebar to that last comment that you just made, do you think that the legislature operating in virtual mode, the way it is, has drawn more participation or observance by Vermonters in the process, or are they disinterested, you think?
Yeah, as a newly elected official that didn't spend a ton of time in the State House previously, it's hard to, I can't really tell. I'm there every day. It's an empty building. That feels pretty unique, certainly. But I've been on Zoom calls for different advocacy days where I've had 200 people, 200 plus people on regular occasions. And I have to wonder, is this new way of engaging in some ways providing more access? You can engage from your home, from your office. We don't have people getting in the car on a snowy March day, which we'll probably have more snow here soon, to drive up to Montpelier to testify. So I don't think there's ever a replacement for that in-person engagement, which is really important, I think, for information sharing and communication. But I hope parts of this and think parts of this should stay. It's also great that we have hearings recorded, the General Assembly is recorded. There's a certain amount of transparency and accountability, I think.
Well, for any of us who have sat in any of those committee rooms, House or Senate, at any point in time, we'll probably be hard pressed to recall the time there were 200 people sitting in one of those.
Yeah, exactly. But we still have for those of you who've been in the State House, we just bought a new coffee pot. So we'll have fresh coffee going as soon as the State House opens again.
Awesome. Rob Miller, looks like you have a question.
Hi, Lieutenant Governor Rob Miller. I'm CEO of AVCU. Nice to meet you. I look forward to meeting you in person someday.
Absolutely. Cross the street. Come on over.
I know, right? We actually have 2 board members that were elected this time last year that I actually haven't yet met in person yet. So interesting world we live in. I do want to talk a little bit about housing to build off John's comments and maybe approach it from more of a quality of existing housing and the interconnectedness with energy efficiency.
Yep.
There is I know the governor's made proposal in his budget for a fair amount of investment in energy efficiency. And I would just offer to you that, we experimented last year with some of the COVID money last year on some energy efficiency programs that worked really well. The home energy loan program through Efficiency Vermont. We're having discussions today with VHFA and some of the other players that are in that market. But I would tell you that in addition to new housing, in order for the state to really move the needle on affordable and quality housing and meet its energy its energy efficiency goals and renewable energy goals, anytime close to its objectives, that improving the existing housing stock is going to be critical in that effort. And those programs, I think we have, as you've already indicated, a bit of a transformative opportunity here to really move the needle in a pretty significant way. So not really a question. I guess it's really more of a commentary. Just make sure that you're staying focused on that at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I was saying earlier about the housing needs of Burlington and the housing needs of rural Vermont, where I grew up, are pretty different, right? We could drive through Newberry or Bradford or parts of Orange County, and there's plenty of housing stock, but it's not affordable. It's not safe. It's certainly not weatherized. And some of those strategic investments, I was meeting with the Vermont Housing Conservation Alliance, I think that's correct, this morning, and talking about the same issues. And I think everyone's kind of rowing in the same direction. Like, this is not a partisan issue. This is, we're all on Team Vermont and need to recognize, as you said, this transformative moment. But if I may, I'd love to, put the question back to you, or the comment back to you. What has it meant for credit unions to have a reliable, I guess, partnership with the governor, or unless the lieutenant governor's office? I'd love to hear that too. But as this money comes to the state, what do you need in terms of communication or regular engagement, so that as projects are being developed, the credit unions are at the table? I guess if there's like an example of things that have worked well in the past, either around the most recent COVID relief package or before that, I'd love to hear, just so, just to know like what works well.
At a big picture level, what works well is when we rely on the organizations to do what they do best, and not, it's going to sound horrible, but not try to over-engineer that. The home energy improvement loan is a good example. It kind of relies on the financial institution to do what they do best, which is lending money. It partners with with the state government to provide some accommodations, particularly based on household income, to buy down that rate, which does provide an incentive and reduces the cost of that housing by creating an opportunity for them to make improvements to their home energy efficiency. When we start to get too caught up in, for lack of a better term, sort of unnecessary bureaucracy and paperwork, and that program started a long time ago in a different version as the Heat Saver Loan Program through the Department of Public Service. And we were one of the institutions that were involved in that program. And this isn't meant to be a reflection on Efficiency Vermont, so don't misinterpret what I'm about to say. But it went from a 4-page contract to a 58-page contract, and I think it's actually doubled since then. And those are just examples that sometimes we get in our own way, and when we really rely on different organizations to do what they do best, and then just create the linkages between them, is really when it works. I would look to try to strengthen programs that we think are working well today before creating new ones.
Yeah.
Part of the other conversations that we're having is how do you bring even more lenders into that program? Because energy efficiency lending and renewable energy lending is a little unique, and it does, there may be ways to do that, and that would be the area of focus for sort of new programs and how we figure that out.
That's really helpful. And in terms of new lenders, sorry, I'll just ask one more question. Is that sort of out of state thinking, or is there a way to build more capacity here in Vermont so that we have the support to do the work that we need to do?
I think it's knowledge, it's training, it's depending upon terms and structure of loans, it's risk management as well. There's a whole it probably a little bit more complicated answer than maybe you anticipate, but I think everyone here to some extent is participating in these types of loans, but I think across the board it's pretty uneven when you look at banks and credit unions across the state.
Okay. maybe a follow-up there, but I'll
Yeah,
contact you directly.
Yeah,
Thank
happy
you.
to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lieutenant Governor, I would just to answer your question about what's coming in terms of new support for consumers. I would kind of piggyback on what Rob said, that when you think about mortgage relief and rental relief, using existing structures and existing organizations, I think the last year when mortgage relief was provided, we really don't need to be involved. We need to be aware of what options exist for members and consumers. And our effort last year was really about triggering awareness with our members. So, we obviously have a lot of loans outstanding, first mortgages, home equities, et cetera. But I think VHFA and other existing agencies and groups did a great job of distributing those funds. And so staying with those tried and true methods is, I think, a good perspective. What I heard this morning from you and from the leadership of the State House, there's some urgency to getting these things to the Vermonter, to assist. So anything that can be done along rails that are already built is certainly constructive. And the association does a great job of keeping us aware of those things. So, there's not a lot of lift with us in terms of making sure our members know what's available to them. But if there are other things that need to be, looked at, we're certainly available to help.
Great. I like the old, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think this is one of those moments where there's the capacity sounds like it's there. It's just it's about deploying it quickly. So thank you.
Hey, other questions or comments? I know your time is limited, Molly. Just one thing that crossed my mind while you were speaking, going back and forth with John and Rob. And I don't know if this would be drawn from your time as Lieutenant Governor in this year, or maybe more to what you might have heard on the campaign trail when you were, running for office. But what do you hear from Vermonters? I mean, besides the housing issue that we just talked about and the need for broadband, are there other things that you've heard, other issues that you think have a really broad applicability, and it's they're being met woefully inadequately or unjustly or whatever?
I mean, I think we are, if there's 4 crises in Vermont, it's the pandemic, it's an economic crisis, climate crisis is obviously facing the state as well, and then we are having pretty significant conversations about social and racial justice. I think, equity and access to loans, equity and access to housing, equity and access to broadband, we've talked about some of that, but I think that's, kind of a perpetual conversation that we hear a lot about in communities across the state. And if we're going to be a Vermont that's diverse, that's welcoming, both to business, to new families, making sure that we have the infrastructure in place across all of our systems to be able to do that. And I'm not saying that specifically to you as credit unions, but I just think it's, all of us thinking about where we, fit into a more diverse, welcoming Vermont for the future. And frankly, we have to address what it means to draw and attract and keep people in the state, right? And there's not one simple answer. It's a constellation of issues and opportunities. Access to, that first loan so you can buy a house, right? Or the funding you need to weatherize a home if you're a business, or you're trying to participate in the future in some of our climate goals, which, as Rob mentioned, are really significant, right? A lot of Vermonters over the last year were telling me, I support action to prevent the impact of climate change or to mitigate the impact of climate change in our communities and businesses. But my brothers will be the first ones to tell you, and I heard this from a lot of folks working our lands, that you tell me that I need to comply with potential rules, but I don't have the means to be able to do that. And so I believe in the next year or so, we're going to have to take a lot of steps to make mitigation affordable to Vermonters. And that is where what you've been doing will continue to be amplified, expanded upon in those partnerships with Efficiency Vermont and so on. So I know that's kind of a potpourri of a response to your question, but we are really very much in a moment, and we can't go back. We will go forward. Things will look different. I think there's a lot of room for lessons learned and trying to capture those. But I'm grateful for the time today just to meet you and be able to have a first conversation, because I think a lot's going to happen over the next 6 months and year for the state. And we're all going to have to be innovative, creative, thoughtful, working together, across party lines, which I'm definitely committed to, and thinking to the future. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Molly. It does seem like there's a lot of work to do, or there will be a lot of work to do in all the areas that you've touched on that go well beyond the day that we're not wearing masks anymore,
Right.
or that we're meeting in person, whenever that is. So thank you so much for spending your time with us. We know your door is open to us, and certainly in reverse, our door is certainly open to you, and we hope that, as you've heard already, that you draw on us and feel free to, ask or feed us whatever information or whatever you think that Vermont credit unions as community financial institutions can do to help Vermonters improve their lives and the economy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I look forward to staying in touch. I'll put my chief of staff's information in the contact. There's no light between us, so reach out anytime, and I sincerely mean it. I hope you can stop by the office, come visit. And I'd love to, once out on the road, come visit an institution, learn more about your projects, anything I can do to support your work. So
thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe.